Good afternoon, everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here on the CogX stage with one of my favorite authors and also fellow Asian Americans, Ted Chiang. For those of you who might not know him, he's an award-winning author of science fiction. And I have to admit, I've not always been into the typical sci-fi narratives. But to me, Ted's stories are much more about who we are as humans and how to question the values we hold and build into our lives with technology. So it stirs the imagination in a way and helps ask questions that sometimes only art is able to provoke. And so over the course of 25 years and 15 stories, he's won numerous awards, including 4 Nebulas, 4 Hugos, 4 Locuses, and the John W. Campbell Award for Best New Writer. And the title story from one of his collections, Stories of Your Life and Others, was adapted into the movie Arrival, which some of you might recognize. And if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend that. So welcome, Ted.
Thanks.
So we're here today to explore the space beyond techno-utopias and dystopias, and also discuss a few fundamental questions around the potential of technology in the world that we believe it can enable. And crucially, that involves imagining and deliberating together so that technology is built with society and not just something that's done to society. So to kick things off, Ted, I'm curious, what do you mean by a utopia or dystopia when you're thinking about writing and in general?
Well, okay, so in general, because I guess I don't really, my own fiction is not specifically about, I think, utopias or dystopias. But I think, in general, I think that we need to either, I think we need to reconsider the word utopia or reevaluate what we mean by utopia. Because I think currently a lot of people think of a utopia as some place, some society where everyone is happy, where everything is perfect, where nothing ever goes wrong. And that makes it very easy to be dismissive of the whole idea. And I think that this conception of utopia is, in a lot of ways, I think it's analogous to the happily ever after version of like a marriage, where like the prince and the princess, they go off, they live happily ever after, they never fight, they are madly, passionately love every day for the rest of their lives. And and that is a fairy tale. That is not how real relationships work.
No.
A good relationship is one. It is not realistic to say that your goal is a relationship where you never fight and you are blissfully happy every day. A realistic goal is a relationship where you have healthy, functional ways of addressing problems.
Yes.
Because problems will arise, disagreements will arise, you'll have arguments, but do you have good ways of getting past those problems, of resolving your differences, of going forward with your relationship? And I think that is something that is, I think, maybe what we should be thinking about in terms of what we want from a society, like a utopia. It's not a society where everyone is happy, because that is not a realistic goal. You will never have a society where every person is happy all the time, or even maybe like most of the time. There are always going to be people who are unhappy. That's just reality. But what I think we should be looking for is a social structure which offers good ways of addressing problems. So, because when people are unhappy,
Yes.
do you have a way of dealing with that is healthy and constructive, a way of addressing people's complaints and their issues, and not simply trying to shove them somewhere where they can't be seen. And so, in terms of like what is a dystopia, I guess it's I think probably clear that there's so on this spectrum of like utopias at one end and dystopias at the other end. So if we stick with this analogy, and I don't want to hit this analogy too hard, but if we stick with this analogy of like a relationship, there are bad relationships. We have some idea of what bad relationships look like. There are abusive relationships. There are ones with that are psychologically abusive. There are ones that involve physical violence, yes. And so those are very dysfunctional relationships. And so I think by analogy, we can see that there are some societies where there is active dysfunction, where where the dynamics of the society are profoundly unhealthy, where some parties are harming other parties, and that is that is the thing that we. I mean that. I should also say that dystopias. It's not obviously it's not a dystopia where like everyone is miserable. There are some people who are in any dysfunctional relationship. There's someone who's probably doing okay. It's the other person who's not doing okay.
Yes.
So in a dystopia, there are some people who are going to be doing just fine, but there are other people who are not going to be doing fine.
Yes.
And so that is the situation that we want to avoid is a situation like that. We want a society where people who have who are unhappy, who have issues, they have a way of addressing that. That they can seek recourse. They can make their unhappiness known, and steps will be taken to correct that. And it's not going to magically make everything perfect. But can you do you have a way? Do you have a mechanism of addressing issues when they inevitably arise?
So if we think about how to throw technology into that mix of that relationship, often in a relationship, I think it's not that the intention is always to harm, right? And so you have a quote in one of your stories that says, "It is true that we work with the purest of aims, but that doesn't mean we've worked wisely." And so I'm wondering how you might apply that to technology. And I couldn't help but be reminded of Asimov's quote, which is similar but slightly different. "I could not bring myself to believe that if knowledge presented danger, the solution was ignorance. To me, it always seemed that the solution had to be wisdom. You did not refuse to look at danger, rather you learned how to handle it safely." So how do we think about the relationship between intention in building a technology and a safe outcome? How do we think about translating good intentions into a safe, ethical outcome that reflects more of the utopia you described than a dystopia?
Well, okay, so I think before we talk about the sort of the specifics of technology, I think we have to acknowledge the issue of climate change, climate crisis, because that is something that is an issue which if we don't address, then we probably will not even have the opportunity to address anything else. Because if we are like in a car and we're sort of driving closer and closer to the edge of a ravine, and eventually we're going to start sliding down the ravine to a point where we can't drive up. Like when that car falls into the bottom of the ravine, you will have a whole other set of problems. Mm-hmm. You are not going to be able to address relationship issues at that point. So, in a sense, the most pressing problem,
yes.
Is addressing climate change, because only if we can steer the car out of the ravine, then we can talk about that is the only possibility by which we can then address other issues. Because if we go down the ravine, then we won't even have really, there won't even be the possibility of, say, building a healthier relationship.
Yes.
So assuming we manage to do something about the climate crisis, and so that we don't go down that ravine, then if we have the opportunity to at least consider these other possibilities of things like the roles of technology on society, and how things like AI can either benefit or harm people. And so in that context, again, I'd say that it is the idea is that it's not that like problems will never occur. It's do you have systems in place for addressing problems when they arise? And so we can't predict with any we can't predict with any accuracy what sort of consequences will arise in decades down the line. In general we've had a terrible track record of that. But
COVID, maybe.
But I guess what I think the focus should be on do we have mechanisms in place so that when problems arise, we can address them, as opposed to simply ignoring them or hoping that simply going the way that we've always been going will eventually things will work out. Are there ways for the society to sort of dynamically respond to whatever crises arise? Because the nature of crises, there are some things that we can sort of anticipate, but it's often the nature of crises that they are unanticipated.
Yes.
And so the best you can do is to sort of set up systems, have systems in place for when crises arrive, and then you can respond appropriately. You can take some action, because you will never be able to predict them all. You can predict, you can try and reduce the likelihood of some, but crises will arrive, and you need to be able to react to them.
So whose responsibility is that in your perspective? Like if you think about setting up that system for redress or recourse when something goes wrong with technology, what do you think the division of labor or moral labor or that role looks like between companies, people, governments, et cetera? Or maybe it's beyond all of those things and we need entirely new institutions. What would that look like?
Well, I guess I think that in general, I think in general you need sort of a distribution of power, and I think a lot of the problems arise when there is an unequal distribution of power, and so I think right now corporations hold a lot of power. I'd say, and there is this also this tied to that is this vast wealth inequality, and so a lot of power is concentrated into a very small number of people, extremely wealthy individuals, and and so, I think, in terms of, I think any healthy system will involve the sort of checks and balances, and it is certainly possible to have, when I say, like, for instance, I think, maybe we need more government regulation, and that is not because I think, like, the government should always be more powerful. It's that, right now there is an imbalance of power, and one way to, correct that imbalance would be for the government to gain some power, and accordingly for corporations or the ultra wealthy to lose some power. But at the same time, it is also possible for the system to go off balance in other directions, and then you would have to make corrections for those. But I guess I think that right now in, say, the West, I think the power imbalance is shaped such that there's an excess of power in the hands of corporations and the ultra wealthy, and so the corrective to that would be probably government, or a shift to, say, workers, labor as opposed to capital. If there's a way to increase the power of unions, or else if there were a shift toward things like worker-owned corporations. Those things do exist, and that would be a way of sort of, I think, redistributing power. That would be a way of where you could have corporations, but those corporations would be would reflect a more equitable distribution of power than the way than currently existing corporations do.
If we take like a concrete example, for example, of right now it's a big trend in AI to build large language models. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's the ability to use existing corpus of language to predict and generate speech. And this is something that it's emerging tech, so regulation won't be there quite yet. But we want to be able to facilitate some norms around equality and representation in that technology. How do you think about that and the systems that have shaped tech? And how would you think about ensuring that cultures are more represented? I mean, I think there's a quote from Wittgenstein where he says the limit of his language is the limit of his world. And so our worlds are actually limited if we only have certain dominant forms of speech. What does that look like for you in terms of reflecting on AI and power?
So I think AI, like most technologies, is often a way for the powerful to reinforce their power. And that is certainly, I think that is more true of AI than a lot of other technologies, because like large language models, they require like huge amounts of data and huge amounts of compute, and those are things that only, like, in general, are only available to large corporations. And so for that reason, it's very easy to see like AI as being something that powerful corporations have at their disposal, and the powerless find it unavailable to them. And so that is true not only in terms of like sort of corporations versus individuals, but also things like dominant cultures and sort of maybe or subaltern cultures, cultures that are have been the subjects of imperialism or colonialism. AI, because of how it is more readily available to the powerful, it is very easy for it to reinforce those power imbalances, and both across classes and across different cultures internationally. And yeah, that is. This is obviously a really big problem, and I don't think that there is an easy solution. But I guess if people working in AI want to be working towards solutions to trying to solve problems rather than exacerbate them, I think this is something that they need to consider very carefully. What are the uses to which their technology is most likely going to be applied, and is it going to help? Is it going to help laborers in their workers in their struggles against capital? Is it going to help individuals, depending on the country, in their struggle against either corporations or the government? Is it going to help, countries in the global South in their struggle against, the global North? All of these things are things that, I think that. People in AI need to be thinking about if they want to be able to legitimately say that they're trying to make the world better.
I mean, you've previously mentioned you don't like the concept of superheroes because you think they reinforce status quos and validate superiority complexes. And I'm curious, if you imagine though AI, like you're saying, is superhuman, what would that actually look like in a utopian society? If you throw out everything that we know about AI today and you could build it for utopia, the way you've described it, with redress, what would that look like?
Well, okay. So what I said about superheroes, this was in the context of the Ezra Klein interview.
Yes.
So one of the things I said about superheroes is that. The superhero narratives that we are usually presented with, superheroes are always defending the status quo. They are always trying to restore society to a presumed idealized state that society was in before some attack from outside. And superheroes in the superhero narratives that we're traditionally given, they don't do anything about systemic injustices. Superman does not do anything about police violence, or wealth inequality. Superman doesn't do anything about the climate crisis. Superman basically keeps things the way they are. So that's a problem with superhero narratives, that they reinforce the idea that the way things are right now, that's good. It's the way it should be, and so if they're these superhero narratives, they gloss over the problems that currently exist.
Yes.
the other issue with superhero narratives is that they put all of the agency on a single individual, or just a small number of individuals, like Superman acting alone, or a handful of individuals. They make the decisions. They have all the agency. They're the ones who can act, and so in a way they are sort of the unelected kings of society. Even if they are not technically rulers, they are they wield a lot of power, but they were not elected.
Yes.
And that's, I think, not a society that we want to live in. We want a society where collectively the people decide what should be done. And so if we think of it like AIs as being superhuman in some sense, which I don't think is really a useful way to think about AI. But I think the tendency to think about AI as superhuman, in some ways, that is a way of shifting the decision making to someone else. It's like these are problems that we don't have to
address.
We don't have to figure out ourselves. We can let the superhuman AI figure out these problems, and we don't have to grapple with them ourselves. And so when and so I think there is this tendency where people say like, well, if we can just solve AI, then it will solve these other problems for us. Like, we just create some superhuman AI, and that will solve climate change. And it's like, it is. I mean, no, I've never seen any specifics about like what that might look like. What how is some superhuman AI going to solve climate change for us? But it seems like there's a sort of this subtextual message that that means we won't have to actually do anything. We don't have to make any tough decisions. We don't have to change anything. We can just sort of offload that onto someone else, onto this superhuman. They can solve the problems for us. And there's something I think clearly very comforting about that idea. Just as there is something very comforting about the idea that Superman will always keep us safe and prevent anything from ever hurting us. But yeah, that's not only is that not realistic, that's not I think a sort of a healthy or mature way to think about your problems. Like these are things that we as a society have to address. We as we as a society have to address things like wealth inequality and police violence and climate change. And I should also be clear that when I say like we as a society have to address climate change, by that I don't mean like we should each be trying to reduce our carbon footprint. I mean that we as a society have to enact sweeping changes at a governmental level to address climate change. We need to make the government act to do things that governments are supposed to do, to work on behalf of the people.
Sounds like what you're saying is that we shouldn't be giving AI or ceding the responsibility or moral agency to AI, but rather have it work with society. Is that?
Well, so I don't think that there is a I guess my conception of AI is not something that one can cede moral responsibility to, because I don't think of I think in the foreseeable future, AI is not something which can be a moral agent and which can take moral responsibility. It is a tool used by people, or either not, whether it's people individually or more likely institutions that are under the control of certain people or under capitalist interests. So there is there's this quote I like. There's a technology critic named Michael Sakasis, and he said that technology is with technology we're building machines for the evasion of moral responsibility, and in some ways, he's like that is something that like. That is what bureaucracy. That's why bureaucracy exists. It absolves individuals of responsibility because this is just the way the system works, and I think a lot of the sort of the technologies that we call AI are different versions of that. They're ways of sort of encapsulating the evasion of moral responsibility which exists in bureaucracies and sort of packaging that up into a box. But again, it is a it is still a way of for people to avoid taking responsibility for their actions, and so I think that that is also something that like anyone who's working in AI, and if they want to be able to say, with a clear conscience that like they're trying to make the world a better place, they have to also consider is this something which is going to allow individuals to evade moral responsibility? And because if the system, if these systems that they're building are going to be used that way, then they need to really I think take a hard look at that and consider again are they actually making building a better future? Are they working to making the world a better place? Or are they just sort of making it easier for people to keep on doing the same things that they've always been doing?
Well, super salient advice for me. I think with one last question, and then I think we have some time for questions as well, which is, and we had chatted about this before, but what do you think it means to be a Luddite today, or to be anti-technology in today's world?
So, so people use the word Luddite to refer to someone who has sort of an unthinking antipathy toward technology, but if you actually read what the Luddites' actual goals were, they were not anti-technology. That is kind of a slander of what they were actually after. The Luddites, they were actually they're actually protesting for like better pay and safer working conditions. They wanted factories where children did not develop lung diseases because there was so much cotton dust in the factory. They wanted all the things that that unions basically are working for now. They destroyed machines as a way of getting the attention of factory owners, but it wasn't because they disliked technology. It was because that was really the only means available to them at the time. And it's also worth noting that Luddites, they were very specific about whose machines they destroyed. They did not destroy the machines of factory owners who treated their workers well, who paid their workers a fair wage. So over time, we have taken the term Luddite and radically distorted it, because they were not anti-technology. They were basically they were struggling for economic justice, and I think that it is it's been sort of a one of the great successes of capital over the last couple hundred years, that they have managed to turn this name of a movement for economic justice and corrupt it into a shorthand for some sort of knee-jerk anti-progress movement. But I think anytime anyone accuses anyone of being a Luddite, or anyone accuses anyone of being anti-technology, I think it's worth asking: are the people that you are criticizing, are they actually anti-technology, or maybe they're actually for economic justice?
Yep.
Maybe they are for workers' rights, and because we have had this historically, we have had this very strong identification that more technology equals progress. But what does progress mean if it does not include greater human flourishing? If it does not include better lives for workers? This sort of narrow definition of progress usually winds up to mean like greater profits, but that is, I think, not what most people. If we really think about it, that's greater profits for factory owners. That's not what we want more of. We want greater human dignity.
Yes.
We want individuals to have more autonomy, more control over their lives, and there are ways in which technology can help can do that. So whenever anyone is accused of being anti-technology, we need to ask, are they actually anti-technology? What are they actually? Maybe they're actually advocating for economic justice, and the people who are calling them anti-technology, are they actually defending progress, or are they defending greater profits for factory owners? So I think that we should all be Luddites. Because that, if you look at what the Luddites actually wanted, those are things that I think we want. We want we want greater dignity in our lives.
Yes.
And so, there are, I think, very few people who are accurately characterized as being anti-technology. I think what most people who are called that, they are perfectly fine with technology as long as technology works to increase, sort of individual autonomy and control over lives, and not decrease it to the benefit of factory owners.
Yes, and I think it's incumbent on those of us working in tech to open up that dialogue as well with people who are wanting to give the feedback and wanting to be in that conversation, like yourself. So I'm curious to see if we have time for questions. I'm looking for, I'm just looking at the organizers over here. But yes, great. Yes, right here. I think there's a mic that's going to come around as well, so.
Hello, my name is Kutlu from the Creative Destruction of Oxford. So thank you for bringing this perspective into this discussion, which is, I guess, oftentimes we just look at unicorns and more technology, bigger, better, faster. So that's interesting. So I'm curious about some examples of initiatives, leaderships, projects that you like going in this direction, be at grassroots level initiatives, open source, government, society. So, I mean, do we expect too much from the big corporates? Just curious about where you see some good things heading up and where we should also look for more.
Well, okay, so I'll just mention there was an article in the magazine Technology Review recently. They had a series of articles about AI and colonialism, and one of the articles was talking about this project in New Zealand to build a large language model for, I think, Maori, and this was a project being done sort of against the typical direction of language model development, which is mostly English or some other dominant language, and it was a sort of a community effort to both develop an actual corpus on which to train the model, both develop the model and create a corpus on which the model could be trained, which they did themselves rather than relying on any corporation. And because as language models become more prevalent, and if there's more voice activated technology or technologies dependent on speech recognition, if those are dependent on you speaking English, then that will inevitably disenfranchise speakers of other languages. And so so I thought that was a really interesting example of a project that was not corporate led to fight against that trend, and as a way of preserving the Maori language and making sure that Maori speakers would be able to make use of technology that if we continue in this sort of voice activated speech recognition direction. So that's I guess that's one example that I just encountered recently, which I think deserves attention.
Here.
Thanks so much. As you've touched on before, the utopias are so subjective. And I think throughout the 20th century, there are many, many examples of people trying to create utopias that actually lead to horribly racist or horribly exclusionary results. And so I wonder, do you think that trying to aim for utopias is the wrong approach? And if so, how would you sort of see a way to build a better future?
Well, it has been said that anyone's vision of a utopia is probably someone else's dystopia. And I guess I think that that arises from in some ways this idea that that there will never be there's a simplistic idea that a utopia means there will never be disagreement, which implicitly means everyone will think the way I think, and that, as I said, like the marriage that never has any arguments, that is not a realistic goal. That's not a healthy goal. The goal is, I think, the goal should be, a way to sort of a healthy, constructive way to deal with disagreements when they arise. Whether that means either reclaiming the word utopia to take on a different meaning, or it may be too late for that and simply rejecting the word utopia. But yeah, I think the goal that we should be aspiring to is a society that can accommodate differences, that does not require everyone to share the exact same set of beliefs. And that is absolutely not easy, because there because it's very tempting to say, like, well, a utopia, at the very minimum, we're going to say, like, everyone's going to agree on a couple basic things. But it's like, actually, it turns out it's very hard to find even a couple basic things that every single person agrees on. And like I said, there is always going to be disagreement. There's always going to be differing opinions, and I think, the measure of a healthy society, of a good society, is whether it can accommodate those different beliefs in sort of a way that both doesn't harm those people who hold those outlying beliefs, but also does not harm the people as a whole. That is, I think, the challenge. And yeah, it is not easy, but yeah, I think that as a goal, that acknowledges sort of the reality of millions of people living together, that you are not going to get universal agreement on almost anything.
Well, with that, thank you, Ted, for providing all these insights, and thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session. So.